speaking of wasting time on social media and YouTube, I wanted to ask you about the interview that you mentioned in the book on the Rubin Report with Eric and Bret Weinstein, and
Oh,
what made you want to watch that interview, that joint interview with Eric and Bret Weinstein 3 times in 1 week when you were going through that period that you were writing about in the book, kind of discovering
yeah.
the
Well,
intellectual dark web.
the intellectual dark web, right? Or free speech YouTube, as I called it.
Free speech
So
YouTube,
yeah, well,
yes.
just to back up, that was my coinage. So just to back up for some context, when I was this was probably 5 years ago now. I was splitting up from my husband, and we had been living in Los Angeles, and I moved to New York. And it was a very amicable split, and that's part of the reason we had to put some distance between us, because I don't think we might not have gotten it together to actually like split up, I mean, as quickly as we needed to. So I came to New York, and the thing about my marriage, and I write about this in the book, that for all the problems that my husband and I had, we were very much intellectually aligned. I think of him as my intellectual ally. We just talked all the time. We constantly had interesting conversations. We really were sort of on the same page generally. And so when I didn't have that anymore, I had lost I had lost my conversation partner. And I found myself turning to YouTube, and I was discovering all these like intellectuals, these writers, these scholars, scientists, journalists, etc., having these really nuanced, free-ranging, digressive conversations that, for whatever reason, were not available in the usual spaces. And by the usual spaces, I mean everything from the usual media spaces like National Public Radio to my own friends and their conversations on social media. This was happening at a time when I was noticing that people that I always assumed I was on the same page with politically, in terms of social issues, political issues, there was suddenly like this divide, and there were a lot of people kind of speaking in apocalyptic terms, just about
Yeah.
about the way that life was for women. For instance, I started noticing a lot around issues around feminism, and suddenly like all these girls that had grown up with like every advantage and every opportunity and actually doing better than boys had decided that it had never been a worse time to be a woman, and that we were under the thumb of this patriarchy, and that we were in danger every time we walked down the street. And it was like hyperbole. And I didn't understand why otherwise intelligent people were trafficking in it. And it became frustrating. So I found these people talking in a different way. And a good example was Bret and Eric Weinstein talking on the Rubin Report. Although I will say that my introduction into this space was actually Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter on Blogging Heads TV. And they are two guys. They had been getting together for years prior to this, but they get together about once a month and talk about issues of race. They're both Black guys. They're called the Black Guys on Blogging Heads.
Yeah.
And they were like mesmerizing, fascinating. That they are the best show in town as far as I'm concerned still. So that's where I kind of went in, and then the algorithm kind of took me along to places like the Rubin Report, which I don't watch as much anymore. But yeah, I think 2017 rolled around, and Bret Weinstein emerged because of the Evergreen saga. And then Eric came around, and I think by 2018, Eric had coined the term intellectual dark web. And I guess I was caught in it to some degree.
Yeah. I remember watching Bret Weinstein talk about everything that happened on Evergreen, and I was learning about that whole situation after the fact. And for anyone listening to this podcast that doesn't know the Evergreen scandal, you could search Bret Weinstein Evergreen on YouTube, and you'll find a bunch of interviews about it. But I thought it was amazing that none of it was reported in mainstream media, Fox, CNN, whatever. Like,
well, they went on Fox was the only place that Tucker Carlson, I think, was the only interview that Bret did.
Yeah, I learned about it through Joe Rogan, Dave Rubin, and remember listening to him talk about this and thinking, this has to be something that's so widespread and so kind of scoffed at in society. Like the fact that a professor would be run out of school like this, I'm sure this has been covered everywhere, and it wasn't. And so I think that the free speech YouTube is a very special place where people can discuss their ideas, and it seems like others are running with that and making their own shows, and because of that, people aren't as fearful and concerned for what other people think about their opinions because of shows like Dave Rubin or Sam Harris, Joe Rogan, people like that.
Yeah, I mean, and you're definitely seeing it intensify just in the last few months, especially. And it's so, I think for people like me who were onto this like 5 years ago, it's really gratifying to see this sort of galvanize in this way. So many people jump on board because, I would be ranting and I would say, like, you guys, there's something wrong with the discourse. Like, am I crazy?